What if the boy in the care file became the man who was writing it? Ryan Kennedy went from being a child in care to becoming a foster carer and qualified social worker. He's lived both sides of the system and now he's using that insight to challenge it. If you are caring for someone else, whether paid or unpaid, and no matter how many hours you do it, did you realise that you may be missing out on thousands of pounds of discounts for things that you may use every day? The Able to Care podcast is proud to be sponsored by the UK's #1 carers card. Started by two best friends who recognise that carers deserve better and are 100% committed to helping to change the lives of all carers and bringing them together as a strong community. Carers Card UK provides support, recognition and rewards. It offers reassurance by providing an ID card that helps access emergency information when needed, while also unlocking discounts, a wellbeing hub, a carers circle tool and a community through their app. All of this for less than the price of a box of chocolates a year. There are discounts on gym membership, days out, electrical goods, clothing and even glasses. Let others know you care while taking a little care of yourself with an ID card you can be proud of. Visit carerscarduk.co.uk/promo code/able to care today to order yours. Hello and welcome back to the Able to Care podcast. I'm your host, Andy Baker, and today we're joined by somebody whose journey is as powerful as it is purposeful. Ryan Kennedy grew up in the care system, navigating placements, feeling like a name in a file rather than a young person with a voice. But today, Ryan stands on the other side of that story. As a qualified social worker and foster carer, and having supported over 13 children through some of the most formative and vulnerable moments. In this episode, we'll talk about the system, what it gets wrong, what it gets right, and how we can do better. We'll unpack what it means to offer real understanding, not just policy, and explore what happens when someone with lived experience finally gets a seat at the table. So Ryan, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate
Absolute
it.
Pleasure. Ryan, when you think back to being in care, what's one moment you maybe wish that every social worker could actually witness?
It's that moment when you're first placed with your foster carer, or whether you're in a residential setting and they've dropped you off at your home, your new home, with your belongings, and they leave, the door shuts behind them, and they then miss those crucial moments where you're in an environment that is unfamiliar, unknown to you. You don't know the people, you don't trust the people because you don't know who they are. And that's the moment I wish that all professionals could observe and be that fly on the wall in a moment of time where their job is done. They've got a young person to a safe place, but they haven't been able to then observe what that first few moments in that safe place is for that young person.
I think it's quite interesting you use that wording of safe place. And I'm sure from the social worker's point of view, that's what they feel they've done. They've done that job. And maybe as a social worker yourself, you felt that. But did it ever feel like, I should imagine as a child, it didn't feel like a safe place?
No, because from my experience, my safe place was with my family, was with my birth family, because I didn't necessarily observe all the worries that professionals had around my upbringing. So my safe place was my mum. So I wasn't in a safe place. So to professionals, I was, but to myself, when that door closed, I was in an unfamiliar, scary environment that I had no control over.
Do you think that's something that many professionals, maybe without the lived experience that you've had, are maybe a little bit ignorant to? I'm sure they're not coming from a place of malice. They generally think they've done something amazing and wonderful, and therefore it's almost like a relief to them going, that's it, they're okay now. But it's from your point of view with that lived experience, has that changed your perspective on things?
I think I work in an environment where I think social workers are naive to those factors, that they do believe that they've taken a child from from an unsafe environment and put them to a place of safety. And they do that with all the best will and intention. But there's that trying to be empathic and understand, but at the same time, how can you if you've not lived and experienced that? So I do think there is still a level of poor understanding with professionals of what that those moments truly mean for young people. But I do think the system is trying to understand, and it's getting better.
That's always good to hear. And that's it. You've gone from the journey of you've been the child, you've also been the carer, you've been the social worker. So what do you feel has kind of changed when those roles are reversed for you?
I think the most pivotal moment of change I had was when you are put in a position where you have to make the decision. So I had to make the decision whether it was appropriate for a young person to remain in a home or not. And I'm immediately taken back to the time I was removed and the feelings I had. And although that doesn't inform my decision making, I can still sit and think about those feelings of that young person may be experiencing grief, that sense of loss, that unsure feeling. You know, like when you get nervous and you have butterflies in your stomach. That's the way I describe it, is when I'm making those decisions, I get a nervous feeling that takes me all the way back to when I was 10 and puts me straight back in Ryan's shoes as a child. And I have to park those feelings to allow the correct decision making to be made for the child that I'm working with. So I think that's the main impact I have when it comes to making decisions around stability and long-term planning for children. I do have those care experience lenses on all the time.
Do you think if there was a situation where you could almost travel back in time? Because there's such a role reverse there, isn't it? You've been the child and you've been the foster parent. And so therefore you're kind of seeing it from the two sides. And I should imagine there's part of you as a foster parent that's sometimes going like, I am wanting the best for these kids. Why can't they see it? And then you have to regress back to where you were as going, well, I couldn't see it when I was a child. If only I'd have known what was going through my foster parents' heads in the moment when I was in that situation. Have you found yourself almost in that almost quantum leap type scenario going, oh, if I could go back and just be me then?
Yeah, and I suppose the way I view it is that a lot of the things happen to us as a fostering household. The children present behaviours, and I think, oh, why don't you understand what I'm trying to support you in? And part of me goes, that was you. That was also you. So this is a little bit like your karma, because you should have listened, you should have understood. But I think as times developed, I was in care in the early 2000s, early to late 2000s. I left care kind of later, kind of 2010-ish. And we weren't very trauma informed back then. We weren't led by a trauma lens or understanding behaviours and different diagnoses. And the understanding of neurodiversity now is monumental. And I think that is probably the biggest difference to when I have those moments. I go, oh, but people didn't necessarily see the way I see it now. So maybe I wasn't supported in the same way that I'm trying to support these children too. So I do have those moments where I think, I'm teleported back. But then I then think to myself, actually, even if I'd gone back, would professionals be able to view it from the same perspective that we view it from today?
I think one of the things that we've had a chat about in the past when we've spoken is particularly about kind of the files and the records and the reports. What does it feel like looking or reading a child's case file now, knowing that you were once that file?
It's hard. It's hard hitting because some files are written really great. And I remember getting my files as a previously looked after child, and they weren't written to me. There was a lot of professional jargon and language that didn't make sense. Whereas today, and the organisation I work within, you write to the child. So the language is a lot more flowing and child-centred, and it's more understanding. However, there's still those notions of things have to be written in factual ways. So you have to write certain things that happen for children. And those can be the hard hitting moments because then it's fact. It has to be written how it happened and how it occurred, but you can adapt and change language. And I think I'm noticing now that a lot more professionals are understanding of the language within care recordings and files for children, because they are fully aware that children at the age, when they kind of age out and they're kind of 18, 21, they're going to start looking at their files. And that means that they're going to read what that social worker knows has written about them. And in the era of technology, that social worker can then be found by that young person. If they really wanted to reach out, they could then speak to them. So I think now more than ever, they're more impactful because we are using technology like we are today more and more in our daily lives. And that's then presenting the challenges to make sure that you do it right. Is that added pressure to make sure that you are doing the best that you can do.
I think it opens up maybe an almost side quest kind of conversation in some ways around the utilization of AI, for instance, within social work and care. And that can be used as a genuine force for good, as far as, let's take what I would write. It's very hard for me to necessarily go, well, how would a 12-year-old interpret this? Well, or how can I write it for a 12-year-old? And you can then take a statement, get AI to go, put this in and keep the facts the same, but please can you write this so a 12-year-old could understand it and write it to the 12-year-old? And that, is a way of teaching social workers to write in a more empathic way. There's a system I was looking at recently which allows you to kind of pull through and go, please pull out any emotive language. So if there is any emotive language in there that could be construed as judgmental or negative or critical that maybe shouldn't be in there, it can actually be flagged. And so there's some real tools out there that hopefully will make it better for young people if they're used as a power for good. So I don't know whether you guys look into any of that.
Yeah, and I think kind of you just hit the nail on the head. I think that's what it should be used for, because I think some people, language is perceptive, isn't it? It's kind of how you perceive a word is not necessarily how I perceive it. And I think having a platform that allows you to have a uniform perception of language, it allows you to remove some of that emotive stuff that may not be needed. And it can also support to strengthen that recording, so that when a child does come back to read their history, they're able to go, actually, this happened, and the chunk in the middle that a professional may have written could now be removed out because AI has maybe supported that development.
Yeah, it's good. I think there's some real areas for growth within that area, and it's a bit of conversation for another time, maybe. So, looking back in hindsight, is there anything? Obviously, you've done a lot of study within your degree and training to be a social worker, but is there something that no training manual has ever told you, but your younger self could have?
The system is flawed. I don't think any training really ever tells you that the system is flawed in many ways, because we're taught, we do many trainings, like, as you know, trauma training, attachment training, lots and lots of training on different approaches and secure base and things like that. But they don't tell you that you can use those tools, you can use those models, you can use those theories, but the system may still say no. That you'll do all this intervention, but you want to do all this intervention for a young person, but there's no money to pay for it because the system says no. So we can have all the goodwill in the world and all the training, all the tricks in our belt and in our kind of lockup. But if the money isn't there, the organisation isn't prepared to support that development, then essentially that is the barrier. And I think as I've grown and developed over the years of being a foster carer and moving on to my degree and being a social worker, that has been the consistent barrier, is that the organisation, the institutions and the kind of government policy is always a barrier to getting access to services for all people, whether that's children, adults, elderly people. It is across the board, isn't it?
Unfortunately so, 100%. I think you nailed it there. And when we're doing a lot of the training, and I know you do training as well, it is that kind of, look, we have to teach you best practice, but we understand that's not going to happen. I have to teach you up here, knowing realistically you'll be down here. But if I teach you down here, you'll end up being down here. So I've got to kind of aim for the best, hope for the best, but understand we may get the worst and prepare for that. And it's systemic sometimes. It's not the actions of the individual. It's what holds you back. As you said, access to funding, support, or sometimes the professional seeing it in the same way as the people on the floor seeing it. I'm sure there's been some interesting dynamics you've experienced from the foster parent versus social worker dynamic when you were in sort of that role, and then the social worker role has opened up. Oh yeah, some foster carers are a real pain, and vice versa. Some social workers are a real pain, and it opens up that different perspective of humility, I suppose, doesn't it? You supported 13 children in your foster parent journey. It's 13 now. I can't believe it's 13, Ryan. Has there been things that you needed to be mindful of as far as providing a space for their hurt and pain and insecurities, that you've had to be careful of not letting it consume you based on your past?
Yeah, you have to be. I've had to be very resilient in my role as a foster carer, because although my past is my superpower and it has supported me to support 13 children now, which is astounding, Andy. So that is crazy to think. But at the same time, a lot of presenting behaviours of those 13 children that we've cared for have been parallels with some of the things that I experienced as a young person. So I've had to kind of process that before we became foster carers. That was kind of a process and a journey prior. But then throughout, I've always had those check-ins with our kind of supervising social worker who kind of supports us. And that's helped me not lean on my past to inform my future and to inform the futures of the children that we care for. I do think it's a challenge, and it will always be a challenge, because when you care for a young person, they come into your home with a set of values and beliefs. And obviously we have our own values and beliefs, and they come from our experience, don't they? And from my past, I kind of wanted to let go of a lot of those values because I didn't connect with them anymore. So we could have children coming into our home that had similar values of my past life. And that is probably when I would struggle the most, because I was like, that doesn't align with my values now. I want to distance myself from that lifestyle and those kind of life decisions that were made. However, as the years have gone by, we've been doing it for nearly 9 years, 8.5, 9 years now. It's become more, it's easier to support somebody to recognize their strength within their own values and beliefs, but still have power in my own. That challenge has just become easier, and it's almost, I wouldn't say it's a natural default now, because it is always a challenge. As you meet friends and you meet different family members, etc. You all have different values, and there's going to be things that you like in certain people that you don't in others, but you can still be friends and you can still have close bonds as family members. So that has been a challenge at times.
Well, that leads us on to the next question nicely, actually. So what would you say is the difference between being cared for and being understood?
I think there's a massive difference, actually, between those two kind of messages, really. Is to be cared for is both of those change regardless of who you ask. Those subject matters are going to change. So my view of being cared for is not necessarily the same view that you would have to be cared for. So when I look after the kids that we look after, I make sure that they're fed, they've got the clothes, they get to do their activities, they get to do all the things that they want to do and have a well-rounded childhood. But I don't necessarily understand them every single day. So to be understood is to be heard and to be listened to. But as an adult coming from a position of understanding lots of different social work theories, I don't necessarily always understand the teenagers we work with on a daily basis. And I tell them that. And I think that's the key difference. So for me, being cared for is making sure that your daily care needs are cared for as like Maslow's hierarchy of needs. So that kind of theory, as long as that's kind of cared for, that's your care needs. But the understood element is actually being present in the time with the children, showing them that you listen, that you respond to them. Actively listening is very important. So you're not just listening and going, yeah. You're actually going, okay. They tell me something about their day, and I'm going, so how did that make you feel? Or what did you do in that moment? If there's been a little bit of a drama at school and they said that they got into a little bit of a scuffle with their friends, I'm saying, so what happened beforehand and how did you feel? That's my view of being understood. It's about going a little bit deeper. But there are moments when I go, I've listened, I've heard you, but I still don't understand where you're coming from. And I said, that's not me saying that I don't understand and appreciate what you're saying, but that's me saying that I can't understand, and that's you've got to support me to understand. And that's where I feel they differ. I hope that answered your question.
Yeah, no, it does.
I went down a bit of a path then.
I think it's that collaborative approach, isn't it? Like, I think sometimes there's an expectation from many adults that children, or especially teenagers, the older they get, the higher the level of expectations typically is that you should know why you did what you did and why you're thinking the way you do and stuff like that. But most of us have no idea why we're doing what we do as adults. So it's about entering into that relationship is going, hey, we're figuring this shit out together. We're going to do this journey together, and I'm desperately trying to understand you as much as I can and much as you're willing to let me. But I also understand you're trying to figure yourself out too. I mean, I don't know how much kind of professional therapy you've done yourself, Ryan, but I've done a lot as far as trying to understand myself, because it's really hard to understand yourself without some level of professional support to figure it out. So I think that's an important part of the genuinely feeling understood is not about knowing the answer. It's sometimes just being genuinely interested in the questions itself, isn't it?
Yeah. And I think in the kind of the space we work in, and I think mainly with our fostering hats on, it's so important for children to be understood, but they're within a system where everybody wants to understand them. And that itself is a barrier, because they can then either shut down and think, I don't want to tell anyone anything, or they're telling multiple people things, and then people are taking little bits and they don't fully understand. So I think, especially in the space that we operate in now, it's vitally important that the home that the children live in, that they're listened and understood in this home. Because if they go beyond these walls and they go to a CAMS appointment or they're off to see a social worker, if they're not fully understood there, then at least we can support them to be understood by contacting their social worker at a different point in time, or speaking to the medical professionals on their behalf and things like that. So I think that is the most important part.
Yeah. I love the kind of the shared values that we have both about this, and this system is kind of aligning with that as well. I do still hear it sometimes, that genuine understanding. Sometimes some foster parents still focus on the behavior of the children rather than the understanding of the children. And I heard it the other day, and I've done a podcast on it where, I heard two foster parents talking, and I get it. I completely get it. This is not to judge them, but how are the children getting on? Yeah, so far they're really well behaved. And I was like, that's such a weird way of answering that question. Like, they seem happy. They seem settled. They seem content. They seem to be coping. That should all be that was the answer I was expecting, rather than, their manners are pretty good, they're behaving okay, they haven't hit anybody yet. And sometimes I think that's this weird way of kind of referring to it.
I think that from my understanding, I think that comes from a place of foster carer trauma. Their answer is, they're behaving good so far because they've probably previously had a young person that was challenging. So they're linking that, aren't they, to their past experiences. And that's probably why they're answering it in that way. But I would like to believe that the foster carer you're referencing was thinking that they're behaving so well so far, and they meant those other kind of antidotes that you mentioned. That would be my hope.
I suppose in some ways, yeah, if they're behaving well, that's usually an indication that they are probably feeling fairly okay at the moment. We're not getting a dysregulation, so therefore the behavior is also manageable as a result. So, but yeah, it's always interesting to listen to the conversations. And I think you're right, though. Some, we hear about the tough ones rather than the easy situations for many foster parents and stuff, which is why then looked after children get sometimes stigmatized as far as how people see them, and why some people don't want a children's home near them and things like that. From a challenging the system point of view and being woven into it in the way that you've managed to weave yourself into it across all elements of it, where do you still feel, where are children still being failed in the system? And what do you think a child first system really would look like?
I think this goes all the way back to Victoria Climbié and the kind of refresh of the Children's Act, where the notions from her investigation and her case review was that we need a system where everybody is able to communicate effectively, and we need one system, because I think that's where it truly fails. We bounce one child from one, they're with a local authority foster carer, so they're on one system. They move to an independent fostering agency because that's been a breakdown. They move to another system, so there's another record for the child, and it's just a consistent message that's given, that it's kind of a stop, start. And I really do feel that in those moments, children are failed. We fail them consistently in understanding them at those points in time, because even the system and the processes we use don't allow for that continuity, kind of that continuing care, because you have to have a communication. If we have a young person move in with us, we have to have all their care documents and things like that. And we have to request those because we're not on the same system as the local authority. So if we don't get those vital pieces of information, we can miss information on children that are really important, whether that's allergies or diagnoses. We had a young person live with us for 2.5 years, and we didn't know that they already had an ADHD diagnosis. We did not know that for 2.5 years. And we were talking to professionals about the challenges we were having and about the things that we were recognising in their behaviour that would incline to that they needed an assessment. But they already had one, and they already were diagnosed with ADHD. And that was missed because they had a breakdown where they lived, moved to us, and then the information wasn't shared.
Yeah, it's just not good enough, is it, in many ways? It's how can you support a person properly? I mean, one of the things that we always kind of preach, I suppose, a little bit of my training is related to care plans in adult care sectors is, how can you fulfill your duty of care if you don't follow the one document that tells you how to care for this person? And whereas you're in a situation where, well, I wish I had the care plan or some information, because that would have been really helpful to start making reasonable adjustments to support them and scaffold them in the best way we could to, in the earlier stages. And you said those little bits of biography as well, that little bit of history, when we're looking from a trauma-informed lens, there's certain things we might need to know about potential triggers, situations that actually could be really detrimental in the very early stage of a placement if we don't get that right, if we, instigate something or act in a way that actually could have been perceived completely differently by the child without that information.
Yeah, definitely. And that's where kind of language is key, isn't it? And if we understand that certain words are a trigger, or certain outings are a trigger, or if you visit a certain shop, that's you've got to have that information to support the young people that you care for.
Let me ask you a question. Do you ever find the pressures of supporting, teaching, or caring for someone else overwhelming, and wish you had access to more support and information? The Able to Care podcast, in connection with Able Training, has created the ablehub.uk, where for less than the price of a coffee a week, you can access exclusive podcast content, resources, events, and over 45 certified online courses, covering topics like self-care, understanding dementia, neurodiversity, first aid, conflict management, financial advice, and so much more, with new content and courses being added each month. We are so confident that you will benefit from the Able Hub that we are offering 14 days access completely free of charge. No contract, cancel anytime. Become part of the ablehub.uk community and gain the support, knowledge and resources you deserve. Don't struggle alone. Be able. Find the link in the description. Speaking about kind of language and things like that, is there what's one line or phrase that professionals should maybe stop saying to young people in care? Is there a list?
I could create a very long list. I'm going to take you to your new placement. The word placement grinds me, and I find it a really unhelpful word because it's not a placement; it's a home. So you want to have a child to have a childhood experience. They don't have that within a placement. They have that within a home and within a household. So as part of one of the roles that I do, I'm a family finding social worker, and the language I use when I'm finding matches for children is I'm matching them to a fostering household. I'm finding you a match that meets your needs in a home, not in a placement, because a placement is I'm just going to pick you up and place you here and leave you. And that's it. It doesn't mean anything other than you've been placed here. Whereas a home and a household, those types of words contain greater meaning. In a home, we would typically associate that a home has love and warmth and those types of kind of feelings. So to use the word placement with young children and teenagers, I think it can be quite impactful in a unhelpful way, because then they learn that language is freely used, when realistically, outside of the social work professional bubble, we don't really use that language. It's not used day to day. So that would, if I had to say one, that would be my one word or one phrase that is used when we're matching children to fostering households. The word placement should be deleted from that dictionary.
Can I play? Do you mind if I play devil's advocate on that for one moment and an alternative? And I'm not saying I disagree with you in the slightest. Do you think there is children, though, that might find that difficult because their home is where their parents are, and therefore that could create a kind of an emotional, no, that'll never be my home. And some children, I know, foster care isn't the right place for them because I've got a family, I don't want another family, and that's where they sometimes do better in children's services or children's homes, but still homes. I just wondered what your thoughts were on that, just because I say not disagreeing with you, I think you're right, but just from a different point of view.
I think it's around the words that are put onto it. So you just said a children's home. So you're identifying what it is, and then you've got a fostering home and a fostering household. So it's got that word before it that actually says this is what it is. Because like you said, some children will come into a fostering household or home and this isn't their home. Their home is with mum or with dad or with auntie or uncle or whoever they were staying with previously. But it's about saying to them, yes, but this is a fostering home and this will be your fostering home for now. And to understand that language rather than saying that this is a placement, you've just been placed here. So that's the way I perceive that language. And I think that's the kind of best kind of way to explain it. And that's what I try to do with the children I work with. I don't use the word placement. I will always use fostering home or fostering household or whatever word they come up with, but they haven't come up with anything new yet.
Great answer. Thank you. So from a foster carer's point of view now, what's one thing every foster parent carer should know before their first placement?
I think that all foster carers that have their first children come to live with them should understand that it's okay to say no. I think that's really important, because I think when you are a newly approved foster carer, you can sometimes lead with your heart and you jump in with both feet and you say yes, yes, yes. And then before you know it, you're kind of drowning because you've said yes to a lot of things. You can't manage the child's behaviour, and it can run away with you. So I think that I would say that all foster carers should be able to say no without having to feel that they're going to be penalised for saying that, no, I don't think this is going to work. Or family time, if that could be on a Wednesday instead of a Tuesday, that would work better for us as a household, and things like that. Just understanding that it's okay to challenge professionals and not just to go, yes, that I'm okay with that. Because the fostering household, before that child come to live with them, whether there was other children involved already in the household or not, that's a new child coming in and they need to adapt, and the whole household needs to adapt, don't they? And sometimes that takes a bit of give and take. So sometimes you will say yes, but sometimes you also do have to say no. And that's about keeping the equilibrium within the household.
That's a really important bit of advice, I think, for any foster parent out there, especially new foster parents. I've often come across as a veteran foster parents that like they've realised this sometimes the hard way, that they did sort of, especially, so desperately wanted a child, so wanted to be kind of seen as good foster parents. And we sometimes have that false script to be a good foster parent. We do whatever social services tell us to do. And actually, social services are looking out for the best interests of the child, but they're only seeing it through one lens, which is the social work lens, whereas suddenly the family lens is a very different situation. There's other children to consider. There's other household members. There's the culture of the household. And figuring out, organizing any household, is like running a company, as far as everybody being in the right place at the right time with the right meals and everything like that. And somebody from the outside, especially a social worker that's only maybe looking at one particular child's well-being rather than the household as a whole, may not realize all of the logistics required. But I think it takes courage to kind of go, no, we won't be doing that. Or if we do that, you need to support us to be able to do that, because we can't do that independently.
Yeah. And there's a way of doing it without being harsh or blunt. You can say no. You've got to say no and why. And I think that as long as you do the why is very important.
Yeah, absolutely. We put together a course on maintaining high standards for long-term foster parents. And it was the agency that kind of asked us to put this together was a little bit more negative in their phone, like, how can we stop long-term foster parents, not doing it right? Or, and it was focused, it's just that it just becomes complacency, and it's good to set boundary, but some of them were they've been going for a while, going, no. And it was that they were damaging a relationship. And it's almost, it's a collaboration with the social services as much as it is kind of with the child at the same time. It's a bit of a juggling act, isn't it, I suppose, in some ways?
Fostering is definitely a juggling act indeed.
I think there's many foster parents that do feel they're on the bottom rung of the ladder, though. They are perceived as the least important and the lowest voice when it comes to the child. Have you experienced that from being in the two? Because is that a perception from the social workers in the same way as it is from the foster parents?
So before I became a social worker, that is definitely the view I had. I was talking to a social worker. This is telling them about what was happening with the child, and they essentially told me that I wasn't qualified to make that assessment. And it was at that moment I said, okay, I'm going to get qualified, because I don't think your assessment is accurate. Because as foster carers, we live and breathe it 24/7, and we know the children that we care for. And for a social worker to come in and do their 6 weekly visits, and they haven't seen a child or spoke to them for 6 weeks, and they pop in and then they kind of then express their view, it can be quite challenging for a foster carer to go, hold on 1 minute, that's not right, and then not to be heard. So I think the difference is if you're being heard by a social worker, which I would say a lot of social workers really do listen. But in my kind of example that I just used, I wasn't listened to. And then so many years later, I got my degree. So thank you to that social worker. And then if you kind of flip that on its head and say, in the position I'm in now, I will gladly go into foster carers' homes and I will say, tell me what's happened. Tell me it from your perspective. How can I help and what can I do? Because I don't live and breathe it. I'm not in their house 24/7. I do need to have a really good understanding from the child's point of view. So I'll speak to the child. I need to understand it from the carer's point of view. And then I will also speak to the team around the children to understand their point of view to come to an assessment. But I think it's really important to listen to the caregivers of the children and within that include family members. So if they've had family time and the relationship is good with family members, to talk to them to see how they presented at family time and things like that. I think it's really important.
And just using the word family time rather than contact as well. Is that another one of those terms that your preference is for?
Yeah, that is another one of those terms that I can add to that list.
So it might be.
So I think contact comes from a long-standing court document kind of setup. That's where the language comes from, because it's very clear. Contact arrangements are this, and it's a court kind of it's kind of there, clear as day on a court document. Whereas family time is more, it says what it is. It's family time. You're going to have time with your family. Whereas contact is it's just a bit institutional.
It does sound very institutional. It's almost, you can imagine like a prison setup of where there's a glass thing with a telephone kind of going, oh, have a chat with your mum for a bit. And that feels like that was what big contact would be. So 100%, like you should be in a room, hopefully playing, engaging, talking, laughing. Those things should be ideally encouraged. I think, do you think that impacts probably the one side of things you haven't been in is obviously the parent's role as far as being the other side of the family time kind of thing. Do you think that would make a difference for them as well, being referred to as family time rather than contact?
I would hope so. That's my true hope, because just from thinking about it, putting yourself in their shoes and thinking contact could be anything from touching somebody, holding someone's hand, giving someone a hug, giving someone a kiss, actually seeing them. We know it as it's your contact is you've got 1 hour, you're in a family centre. But I would like to think that family time is just more meaningful. The word holds more weight. It, like I was saying earlier about home and a household, it carries those love and warmth. And I would hope that family time also carries those notes too.
I think it does. Yeah, definitely. It's far less clinical as far as an approach.
Yes.
Love that. So obviously you've been fostering some time now. I know that you've had some amazing journeys, but you've also had some challenges along the way. What are you most challenging, or what have been the most challenging things about being a foster parent?
I would say that the most challenging part is probably the systems that surround the children. We spoke briefly earlier about the children and the individual and the behaviour. Those things we get training on and we're supported, and you can kind of learn, as long as you're open to changing yourself and how you respond to behaviour, then I think you'll be a really good foster carer. But I do think that the system is the biggest barrier, because you'll be advocating for children to get access to services and you'll be told there's a delay, or they're on a list, or no, that can't happen because there's no funding. And that can be quite demoralising, because you're really trying your best to get the services that the children require, need and want. And you can't, and you get doors shut in your face, and you think that children within the care system would have a kind of almost upper hand to getting access to services. However, it's not like that. There are still doors shut, and there are still waiting lists for assessments to be undertaken for looked after children. So I would say the biggest barrier as a foster carer would be the systems that surround the children. And by that, I do mean the social workers' abilities to challenge the local authorities' perspective when it comes to like financial kind of packages that they offer, whether that's access to play therapy and other therapy services, and the delays in that, Because then in the meantime, you've got a child that's on a waiting list for say 6 months on a waiting list for therapy. What are you doing in those 6 months with that child? And that's the time when you need the most support.
You had to negotiate both from a social work point of view and from a foster parent point of view as far as education's concerned, and what have been the challenges or difficulties there?
I would say that a lot of schools are getting better at understanding the sometimes complexities of looked after children and the trauma responses that they may have within school. It's always a challenge to get educational professionals to understand it from a care experienced background and understanding. So we've worked with children that have been on the edge of being excluded from school, and without our input to highlight the experiences that the ACEs that those children have had that impact their education, I think schools may have struggled to understand the perspective of the child and where they've come from and who they are. Because a lot of the time, you'll have a child that comes to you, they will move from their home to you, they won't have their friends, they won't have their family close by, they've got to move to school, new school. So there's all these significant changes which are part of loss. It's all a loss for them, isn't it? And then you take that child and put them in a brand new setting and just expect them to manage. And I do think it is improving the understanding of that, but there's still a long way to go. I think it's all around that collaborative working. And there are a lot of meetings that you attend as a foster carer with school and health professionals and things involved. So you do get that holistic view, but it's about having good training within schools so they understand trauma-informed practice and respond appropriately to children. Because I think schools can be quite rigid in their approach, in the sense of these are our rules. You misbehave or don't follow the instructions, you get a break time detentions, lunchtime detentions, and after school. And then before you know it, that's the cycle the child's in, because there's no other response to them other than you've been told off today, so you've got a consequence, and then this is the consequence, and you're just in a vicious cycle. And we've had it before where we've had a young person have multiple detentions for months, and I really mean months, day after day after day. And we haven't sent the young person to those detentions because we've challenged the school and said, look, this isn't the approach you should take with them. And it takes a lot of work. And it goes back to what I was just saying about that advocacy. You can kind of wear yourself down because you're constantly trying to fight for what you know is right. And I think it is across the board, whether it's in social care, whether it's in educational settings, health settings, you are constantly advocating for the young people to be told no or to be passed from pillar to post. And you've got to manage that to protect the children from that harm.
A very similar journey with that, something very close to me related to going through the detention after detention after detention. We finally managed to get them out of that school, which is really positive because they couldn't support this person at all. I know there's a couple of things. Obviously, I know some of the children that you've had in your care and stuff, and I know you've supported some transitioning, what we might class as the kind of the care cliff of being that post 18. And I know that's been a particularly difficult time for you and your partner as far as managing that journey for, I know a couple of the children you've had in your care. Have you got any advice around that particular stage of a child's journey?
I've referenced it earlier as aging out. I think I said briefly earlier. And I say that from my own experience. So when I aged out, and boy, do you age out, because you turn 18 and the system, although there are things in place now like staying put agreements and things like that, which means that foster carers can continue to care for children post 18, as adults, should I say. But it still is aging out, and it still is a cliff that young people are essentially pushed off, whether they like it or not. It's coming. What advice would I give anybody in that situation? Is to just, regardless, no matter what, remain that constant for that young person. A really good example is that we had a young person leave us almost 3 years ago. He left just before his 18th birthday. We had a little bit of a party. I don't know if you were there for that one. And he moved away back to birth family. That didn't go so well. He bounced back to us for a little bit, and then he decided he wanted to go off into independence, and he moved closer to the seaside. And he's remained in contact with us throughout those whole 3 years. He's been and visited. We've visited him. We've offered emotional support, practical support, and it's been really, that's been the important part, because within his system, we have only been the only constant, because it's at or around 16, 17, 18, they get PAs, which is a personal advisor, which essentially is meant to take over from their social worker. But their visits drop rapidly. So if you've had a social worker that visits you monthly, and then a PA comes along, their visits go to every 3 months-ish. And that can be a massive drop for a young person that's relied on a social worker. The young person I was referencing didn't rely on their social worker. They lived with us for just a little over 2 years. And during their time with us, they had 5 social workers in that short period of time. So their connection with social workers was non-existent. So we recognised that the important part was us. So maintaining that relationship is the key advice I'd give to foster carers, regardless of whether you are offering a stay-in-put arrangement with that young person, or whether they're going off into independence or going back to birth family. The important part is that you were a piece of their jigsaw of life, and that will always be there, regardless of whether they leave and you never speak to them again, or whether they leave and infrequently contact you, or whether they're messaging you most days, like this young person does to us. So it's just about connection. It really is connection, keeping that connection with young people at that monumental point in their life.
I think many of us, if you do have contact with a birth family, I'm still 40. I'm very lucky to have still both my parents still alive, and therefore, if I have a really bad time, who do I go to? And suddenly you've got individuals who are maybe not have that, or even if they do have birth family, that birth family isn't consistent or doesn't feel like a safe place to go if I'm not okay. And therefore having that consistency, that safe base can be massive. Yeah.
Yeah. And they typically, once again, another system fault really, but typically what happens is they're pushed towards other systems. So they leave the foster care system and they're told to apply for universal credit, and they're pushed towards that system again. So then they go from one to the other, and we're in a place where we want to break cycles, but we almost facilitate them continuing because we don't necessarily support and advocate enough.
Yeah. This is like a lot of work, and there's been a few people I've just spoken to about this, and some who are doing another podcast talking about some support around that particular area. But I know obviously you've also increased your family in some ways, haven't you? As far as not just fostering, but you've then gone into special guardianship and things like that. I know you've got some amazing moments and memories, and you've created a very special household. What would you say is kind of try and finish off on a positive, as I try and like to? What would you say is, have you got kind of a happiest memory as far as fostering is concerned, or a couple of happiest, just so you don't leave anybody out, just in case?
All of them. If I say that, it's okay. Over all the 13 children we've cared for, they've all been special in their own way. They've all had their tantrums, I'm sure, and they've all had their moments. And I've probably had them in between as well. But it's that first moment when they first arrive. They come to your house and you see them, and then you get to see them grow and develop. And our eldest now is 18 in a matter of months. And I still remember the first day he was here. And there's a picture of him and me walking at a shopping centre, and he's really diddy compared to me. And those are the moments I cherish the most, is when they first come to you, and it's the opportunity for change. You can see it, and you want them to grasp it with both hands. So the positive thing about fostering is all of it is positive. It is all positive. There are moments where you might pull your hair out, but it is all positive, and the children are the best. They make it worth it every single day. They, regardless of what happens in relation to behaviours presenting or the challenges that they may face, it's seeing their face at the end of the day, knowing that they're safe, they're happy, and they're content with where they are and who they live with. That's the positive ending, I think.
There's got to be a sense of pride and joy that, you were able to offer something, whether you received it or not from your childhood, but that you know that you would have liked, and it would have mattered to you. And I think that must feel very special in some ways.
Yeah, sometimes it does. Sometimes it does.
Well, thank you so much for joining me today, Ryan. It's genuinely been a fascinating conversation and so many insights. And I know that you're stepping in and you've developed a bit of framework as far as the community framework's concerned, as far as a way of better understanding children and supporting. Do you want to just finish off talking a little bit about that?
Yeah, definitely. So with the fostering hat on, and then I got my degree, and then I was like, okay, so what do I do next? And I sat for a moment and I said to myself, bet on yourself. So you've got yourself this far, you've supported the children and they're thriving. What have you done to do that? And I developed the framework that kind of looks at all the things we do in a fostering household. So we adopt a safe environment. We speak to the children. We don't just hear them. We notice the things that they're doing. So the framework itself, essentially, yes, it's quite self-absorbed. It's my surname, but the framework embodies. It's kind of, the K stands for keeping it safe, and that's all about creating safe spaces for children. We've got the E that kind of is about empowerment and kind of empowering children to voice their own wishes and feelings and feel that. And I think that's through the advocacy that we do. And then kind of moving on to kind of the first N is about noticing the unspoken, which I just said. It's not just listening. It's about the language. It's about body language. It's about tone of voice. And then the second N is about normalizing their feelings and helping them. It goes back to what we were talking about understanding them, helping them understanding themselves and saying that it's okay to feel the way that they do, whether that's positive views or negative views, it's okay. And then if we move on to the E, it's about engagement and engaging at their level, at their pace, at their speed, because I think sometimes the systems around them want them to be at a certain level, and it's okay not to be ready yet. And then D is about developing trust, which I think is one of the most important parts of being a foster carer and a social worker. And then Y is about the why, which we spoke about earlier. The why is the most important. If you're going to say no, you've got to explain why. And if you're also going to say yes, you need to explain why. So that's the premise of the framework. It's a work in progress. It's being developed as we speak, and it's growing and getting its own legs a little bit. And it's really warming to develop something that I think the system needs.
Well, make sure obviously in the details, in the description and the show notes and things like that, there'll be ways of, we'll put your socials in there so people can reach out, find you and contact you. But thank you so much for your time today, Ryan. Really enjoyed that.
No, thank you so much for allowing me on your platform. I really appreciate it, Andy.
So for those of you listening, if anything that we've spoken about you found useful, interesting, and you know that somebody would benefit from hearing this and the stories and the information that Ryan shared, then please like, comment and share. Otherwise, thank you very much.